The story I'm presenting to you today is completely different from the last one, and this time we're traveling to India to talk about a woman who chose power and money. But what do you think a person might do to get what they want? Kill? Steal? In today's story, we'll hear some truly strange and bizarre events, and I won't reveal any details so as not to spoil anything for you. My advice is to watch the video until the end, because this is one of the strangest stories you'll ever hear. And during my long research, which didn't last more than 5 minutes, I didn't find a single English-speaking YouTuber who had covered this story. Without keeping you waiting any longer, stay tuned for the video and enjoy watching. Peace, I'm Shamsuddin. This time our story is about a woman named Julie Joseph. Julie was born in a village called Katapana in the state of Kerala, India. Her family was made up of farmers who worked just to make ends meet, and wealth was never their goal. Julie wasn't satisfied with this life and had ambitions of living a more comfortable and somewhat wealthy life. As she grew up, she met a distant relative of hers named Roy Bonamatham, who was an employee and financially stable to some extent. Roy's family was well known in the village they lived in, which was the village of Kudathai, also in Kerala. Julie's village and Roy's village were far from each other, each in a different part of the state. For the people in Julie's village, a girl marrying an employed man was something they considered almost unimaginable. For this reason, she tried to maintain her relationship with Roy. Roy's family consisted of the father, Thomas, the mother, Anama, and they had 3 children: Roy, the eldest, Roho, the second, and a girl named Renji. This family was educated, with both parents working as teachers at a nearby school, and the children were also educated. Some had finished their university studies, while others were still continuing their education. One day, by chance, Roho went to Renji and told her that he had found a letter sent to his older brother Roy from a girl named Julie. When they opened the letter, they discovered it was a love letter that Julie had sent to Roy. At that time, letters were the only way lovers could communicate. From that moment, the story began. After a while, Roy formally proposed to Julie's family. Roy's parents weren't particularly excited about the marriage because Julie's family wasn't closely related to them. As we mentioned that the families were distant relatives, but they encouraged their son, especially after Julie told them that she had earned a degree in commerce and appeared to be an intelligent and educated girl. Since their son loved her, they didn't see any problem with it. On a day in 1997, Roy and Julie officially got married. The wedding day was unusually rainy, and people were saying that this weather might be a bad omen, and that the marriage wouldn't bring good fortune. But despite all the talk, the marriage took place, and the couple moved into Roy's family home, where they all lived together. After the wedding, Roy returned to his job as usual, and Julie spent her time either with the neighbors or going to the market with her mother-in-law or learning traditional Indian cooking from her. After a while, her mother-in-law advised her, saying, "My daughter, since you've finished your studies, there's no need for you to stay at home. Go and find a job to settle into your life." But Julie felt pressured by her mother-in-law's words. She thought to herself, "I left the poverty of my parents' house, got married, came from far away, and now she's asking me to go find a job?" So, she always ignored her and didn't give her words any importance. After some time, Julie became pregnant and gave birth to a boy she named Remo. And of course, he was the first child in the family, so there was a lot of joy when he was born. But after a few months, her mother-in-law came back again and told her, "Go find a job, my daughter, and as for Remo, I can take care of him." At that point, Julie was really upset by her words and insisted on not looking for a job. You might be wondering, why was Julie so adamant? Why was she completely against the idea of working? Was it just because she wanted to be a housewife and distance herself from her family's life? No, let me tell you that Julie didn't have a master's degree in commerce, and she didn't even finish high school. She lied to her in-laws so that their son would marry her, because if they knew her education wasn't complete, they wouldn't have agreed to the marriage. As we mentioned, her goal was to marry Roy because he had a job and was financially comfortable. One day, Julie's father told her he would come visit her and her in-laws. Julie was shocked. If her father came to the house, her mother-in-law would definitely bring up the issue that Julie didn't want to work, and her father would be shocked and reveal that his daughter barely finished high school. So, Julie decided she needed to get rid of her mother-in-law to keep her secret. And indeed, one day in 2002, they were all having breakfast together. They had music playing loudly and were enjoying themselves. Julie, her sister-in-law Renji, and her mother-in-law were in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Renji saw her mother drink some water and go to the bedroom. After about 20 minutes, Renji got concerned because her mother had been gone for a while. She went to check on her, and suddenly she saw her lying down, crying in a strange way. She asked, "Mom, what happened? Why are you crying?" Her mother replied, "My daughter, I'm dying. Gather everyone to come to me." Renji panicked, turned off the electricity, and told everyone that her mother's condition was critical, and she needed immediate help. When everyone gathered, they rushed her to the hospital, but on the way, her face was covered in blood, and she could hardly breathe. 5 minutes after arriving in the emergency room, the doctor announced her death. The news was shocking to everyone, and they fell into a state of hysterical crying and deep sadness. No one suspected anything about her death. They all thought she had suffered a stroke or something, especially since she had some health issues. So, her family didn't insist on an autopsy, and they didn't know that their evil daughter-in-law was the one who killed her. You'll find out how as the story unfolds. After they buried the elderly woman Anama, Julie completely changed. She started taking over all the tasks Anama used to do, like cleaning the house and preparing meals. Julie became like the main person in the house. And it didn't stop there. She also began giving orders to everyone. She wouldn't allow Renji to do anything without her permission. She controlled everything in the house. Renji noticed Julie had changed, but she didn't tell her father because he was also struggling with some health issues. Julie was trying to assert her dominance and gain everyone's approval with her actions. After some time, Julie realized that she could gain even more respect and admiration if she worked as a teacher, just like her mother-in-law. So, she pretended to have gotten a job at a school near their home and would always claim to go and return from the school. This move earned her the trust of her family and relatives as well. As I mentioned before, someone with a job like that is highly respected and seen as superior. Her goal was to gain people's respect and admiration so that no one would suspect her of committing any crime. Over time, the situation in the family remained the same until 2005, when Renji, Julie's sister-in-law, got married and moved with her husband to a different village. Things remained stable with the rest of the family, and there were no issues. But in 2008, problems began between Julie and her father-in-law Thomas. The reason was that a man named Imes Matthew had started visiting them frequently. Imes was the nephew of Anama, the mother-in-law that Julie had killed. I know I'm giving you a lot of details, but things will become clearer little by little. Remember Imes, because he will play a role in the upcoming events. Imes worked at a jewelry store owned by his uncle, and he regularly visited Thomas's house. After a while, he and Julie became close friends. Thomas started noticing this and asked Julie, "What's going on between you and Imes?" She kept giving him fake excuses, but he didn't believe her, and his anger grew. Julie sensed that her life was in danger, that Thomas might expose this to everyone, so she had to act fast. The best solution was to kill him and get rid of him. And the main goal wasn't just to eliminate him, there was a much bigger plan, which you'll learn about as the story continues. Julie wasted no time. One night in 2008, after Thomas finished drinking his coffee, he had some medicine to take before bed. Julie went to him and gave him the medicine with a glass of water. Right after drinking it, he started feeling severe pain in his stomach, lost consciousness, and collapsed on the floor. Julie quickly went and hid in her room until his youngest son, Rojo, found him. They rushed him to the hospital in an attempt to save him, but unfortunately, he died on the way. After the father's death, the family assumed he had died of a heart attack, as he had been suffering from several health issues, as we mentioned. And imagine that Julie was the one who prevented the doctors at the hospital from performing an autopsy on the body. You know, it's the right of the children or the doctors to request an autopsy if they're suspicious of something, but nobody suspected her of anything. Julie managed to convince the doctors that the death was due to a heart attack, and then they took the body and buried it in the cemetery. Here's another important point too. The first victim, Anama, died in 2002, and the second victim, Thomas, died in 2008, meaning there was a 6-year gap between them. This gap kept anyone in the family from suspecting that something wrong was happening. After she finished killing both parents, Julie went back to the house and started exercising even more control than before, giving orders and ruling over everything. Not long after these events, they had a second child, besides Remo, and named him Reno. At this point, you'd think Julie, with a growing family, would feel more responsibility and step away from these negative thoughts. But the opposite happened. During that period, Roy's work wasn't going well, and they were barely getting by, just enough to eat and drink. So Julie decided she wanted a divorce, and to live her life. For him, he didn't mind. But first, he called his sister Renji and told her about it. A few days later, the siblings were sitting together, and Roy pulled out a will their father had written before he passed. In this will, their father mentioned that the ownership of the house they lived in and the land in his name would be passed to both Renji and Julie after his death. Julie was surprised. What did she have to do with this in the first place? Their father had been suspicious of her behavior before he died, so why would he leave her anything? There were other children much more deserving than her. She took the will from her brother and was shocked when she saw there were no witnesses' signatures on it. And of course, a will should have witnesses sign it. Roy found this strange too, and from that point, he started getting suspicious of Julie. By then, he knew there was an affair going on between Julie and Imes, and he became angry about it. He constantly questioned her harshly, asking, "What's going on between you and that man?" When Julie realized Roy was starting to suspect her and began closely watching her actions, she knew it was time to add a third person to her list, her husband, Roy. One day in 2018, Julie put her kids to sleep upstairs and waited for her husband Roy to come back from work. At 8 p.m., she made his favorite meal, chickpea curry with rice. When he arrived, he was really happy because it was his favorite dish. But what he didn't know was that this meal would be his last. After eating just a small portion, he felt intense stomach pain and went to the bathroom. He stayed in there for a long time without making any noise. Julie knew the plan had worked, so she called his brother Rojo and told him that Roy was in critical condition, and she didn't know what had happened to him. When Rojo arrived, he found Roy lying on the bathroom floor, foaming at the mouth. They immediately took him to the hospital, trying to do anything they could, but by the time they arrived, the doctors told them Roy had already been dead. That evening, Julie called Renji in hysterics, crying and telling her that her brother Roy had died. Renji was shocked by the news and asked her, "What happened? What are you saying?" Julie told her that Roy came home around 3 p.m., had chickpea curry and rice while he was out, and didn't eat anything for dinner. Then she went to the kitchen to prepare food, and he went to the bathroom. A few minutes later, they discovered he had died. So, Roy was the next victim in the family. Now, could anyone suspect that something was wrong? Yes, someone did, and this time they insisted that the doctors perform an autopsy on the body. That person was Roy's uncle, Mashel Matthew. Apologies if I pronounced any names wrong because their names are difficult. Mashel had a feeling that something strange was going on in this family. Julie told him, "My husband is already dead. Why do we need to do an autopsy?" But he didn't listen to her. And indeed, the doctor performed an autopsy on Roy's body, and after the autopsy, the report stated that the cause of death was cyanide poisoning. For those who don't know, cyanide is an extremely toxic substance, and just a small amount of it is enough to end a person's life. At this point, everyone was shocked by what they were hearing. Cyanide? Why would Roy even consume cyanide in the first place? But then Julie stepped in and told everyone, "I know most of you don't know this, but Roy was in debt for more than 100,000 rupees, and he wasn't living normally because of the pressure he was under. He probably decided to kill himself to get rid of the burden. Believe me." At that moment, both Rojo and Renji believed her story, and not only that, they didn't blame their brother for taking his life over the debt. In fact, they even said out loud that they felt anger and hatred toward their brother, even though he was dead. Rojo and Renji said, "Our dead brother has a huge debt. How are we supposed to pay it off?" But the strange thing was that after his death, no one came to ask them for any money, and no one demanded anything. During this time, Julie told them, "That's it. There's no need to investigate this case any further." She even forced them to stop the police investigation, especially since the story was starting to spread in the media. I mean, 3 family members had died in very similar ways. Now you might ask, didn't the police suspect anything? Didn't they question anyone from the family? Strangely, no. Even the head of the toxicology center in Kerala said, "If the death was due to cyanide, the first thing you should suspect is that it's a murder, regardless of what the family says." But the shocking thing is that this idea never crossed the police's mind, or they just didn't take it seriously. Now, getting cyanide legally in Kerala is really hard, but some people, like jewelers, can get it easily because they use it to polish metals. It's clear that the key to this story is figuring out where Julie got this substance from. After these events, Julie took control of the family house. One day, Rojo went to check on the piece of land that had belonged to their father, and he discovered there was an ongoing process to transfer the ownership of the house into Julie's name. He immediately called his sister Renji and told her, and she was shocked. How did she even get the documents? So, they asked him to get the paperwork to see how she started the process, and they found out she had forged documents claiming that their father Thomas transferred the property into Roy's son's name, and later Roy transferred the ownership to his wife Julie. The documents she had were signed by a notary, and all the required stamps were on them. To prove the forgery, they brought out the old will we mentioned earlier, the one with no witnesses' signatures. They called the elders of the family, especially their uncle Mashel, who had insisted on the autopsy of Roy's body. They told them everything and showed them both the old and new documents. Through this evidence, they were able to take back the land and the house that Julie was trying to steal. They could have had her arrested and filed a lawsuit against her, but they didn't do that because she had 2 kids, and they didn't want them to grow up without a mother. So, they forgave her for what she did. And imagine, they even let her stay in the same house without kicking her out. At this point, Julie realized that the person behind all these moves, the one pushing Rojo and Renji to act, was their Uncle Michel. He was also the one who insisted the doctors perform an autopsy on Roy. And he had been suspicious of her behavior, constantly telling everyone that Roy's death was neither suicide nor a coincidence. After Roy's death, Michel often visited Julie's house to check on her and to see if she had any connection to Roy's death. During these visits, he discovered the relationship between her and Imes Matthew, who worked at a jewelry shop. By the way, Imes is also his nephew. When he found out, he told her to stay away from him, focus on her life, and take care of her kids. He also told her he was going to tell the whole family about it. At that point, Julie felt like this man was going to expose her secret to everyone, and she realized she had to get rid of him too. One day in 2014, Renji got a call from Julie, who told her, "Sadly, your uncle has passed away, and he was at my house." Renji was shocked and confused. "What are you saying? He just died suddenly?" Julie replied, "Exactly, just suddenly. He was sitting at my house, and all of a sudden, he lost consciousness. I called the ambulance, and they took him to the hospital, and they determined that he passed away suddenly." Now, suspicions should have increased around her even more. But no one suspected her, because her relationship with Michel was good. The proof was that he frequently visited her house. Secondly, she had become an expert in poisoning. When she decided to poison someone, she knew the exact amount to use. She would put a small amount in their drink, and as soon as they drank it, they would die. Thirdly, when they took him to the hospital, none of the doctors suspected anything or ran any tests. They just determined that he was an old man, and most likely, he died of natural causes. So basically, Julie had one goal in life: to live comfortably while trying to take over her husband's property. But this plan didn't work out, and everything fell apart even before she could grab hold of it. That's how she ended up trapped in the house with her kids, with no one to help them. At the same time, some people started to suspect her relationship with Imes Matthew, who was her husband's cousin. That's when she realized she needed to find someone else, someone more powerful than Imes. Suddenly, the idea of getting involved with Shaju Zacharias, a relative of her dead husband, popped into her mind. She would tell everyone, "If I had a husband like Shaju Zacharias, I'd be so happy because he'd meet all my needs, and I wouldn't want for anything." The reason for that was Shaju was a teacher, making good money, and he was relatively wealthy. But the issue was that Shaju was married to a woman named Silly, and they had 2 kids, a boy named Abel and a girl named Alphine. So, the crazy woman started thinking about killing his wife so she could marry him. She had already killed Roy, his dad, and his uncle, and no one had ever caught on. So, of course, she thought she could kill Shaju's wife too and get away with it. But before that, she needed to get rid of someone else. And this is where you're going to be shocked by how evil and cunning this woman is. Imagine, she decided to kill their little daughter Alphine first. You're probably wondering, what does this innocent child have to do with anything? The psycho woman thought that if she only killed Silly, she'd be stuck raising the little girl, and raising a daughter would be harder than raising a son since he was younger. So, she figured if she got rid of both the mother and the daughter, she could marry Shaju easily and live in peace. And that's exactly what happened. On May 1st, 2014, there was a birthday party for Shaju's son Abel, and Julie and her kids were invited. She showed up at their house with a gift, and they thanked her for it. Then they all sat together and started eating. Alfine's aunt was holding her and playing with her, and all of a sudden, the little girl started acting strange, jumping up and down, crying hysterically, and doing weird things. Everyone rushed over to see what was happening to her, but her condition kept getting worse. Without delay, they rushed her to the nearest hospital. When they arrived, the doctors told them that the little girl's condition was critical, and a few minutes later, they informed them that she had passed away. Everyone thought maybe the girl had choked or something, but no one knew that this innocent 2-year-old had been poisoned with cyanide by a heartless, soulless woman. It seemed that Julie had put cyanide inside a piece of candy and given it to the little girl to eat. The strange thing is that Julie was a mother herself, so how could she poison a child the same age as her own? What was she thinking? After Alfine's death, her mother, Silly, fell into a deep depression. This was when Julie swooped in, becoming her close friend to further her dirty plans. She became Silly's best friend, and after some time, Silly confided in Julie that she and her husband were thinking about having another child to fill the void left by their daughter's death. Julie then told her about a medicine that her uncle, whom she had killed, used to take. She said, "This medicine is great for your health and really helps with deep depression. I've been using it for a long time, and I highly recommend you try it." Silly trusted Julie's words and decided to buy the medicine and give it a try. What she didn't know was that Julie had taken the capsules and filled them with cyanide. The next day, the two of them, along with Shaju, went to the dental clinic. While they were waiting in the reception area, Julie gave Silly a pill, telling her it would help reduce her stress and anxiety before seeing the doctor. But suddenly, Silly fainted and collapsed backward. They rushed her to the hospital, but unfortunately, she died on the way. After this incident, the doctors at the hospital insisted on performing an autopsy because they were confused. She was at a dental clinic, took a pill to reduce stress, and then suddenly died. What could be the possible cause? But here, Shaju told them, "No, autopsies are not allowed in our family's customs. Are we going to perform an autopsy every time someone dies?" The doctors reluctantly agreed, taking his word since he was her husband, which was strange behavior. It shows that justice and the law are practically absent in India. Normally, they should have suspected the husband, as it's possible this was a planned event. But what's done is done, and no one thought twice about it. They took the body home for burial. Now, some might wonder, was her husband involved in her death? Could he have been working with Julie? Sadly, no one suspected this possibility because there weren't any ongoing issues between the couple. After Silly's death, Renji went to their house since she was family, and she recalled seeing Julie there, acting as if she were deeply saddened. Julie was arranging flowers and food for the guests, organizing everything, almost as if she was trying to control the situation, just like she had done after killing her mother-in-law. And it wasn't just Renji who felt this. Many people who were there noticed it too. This is where doubts started creeping in. Was Julie behind all of this? Did she kill Silly just to get her husband? And the little girl who died? Was Julie the one who killed her too? Because she was an obstacle in taking care of the mother after she killed her? Renji kept thinking about this over and over, but there was no evidence to back up her suspicions. The weird thing is, a year after Silly's death, Julie called her oldest son Remo and told him that someone had asked for her hand in marriage. When he asked who, she said it was Shaju, Silly's widowed husband. During the call, she was trying to get her son's formal approval, and since he didn't want to stand in her way, he asked, "Are you comfortable with this man?" She responded, "If you feel he's a good fit for your life, go ahead and marry him without any problems." And so, in 2017, the two of them got married and started living together. Finally, Julie had achieved her goal after killing 6 victims. The first was her mother-in-law, Anama, then her uncle Tom, then Roy's father, then her uncle Man Shadle. After that, she killed little Alphine, Silly's daughter, and then finally killed Silly herself to marry Shaju. I mean, you can't get more evil and twisted than this woman. But as they say, no matter how clever a killer thinks they are, no matter how much they believe they can escape punishment, they'll always leave behind a clue that exposes them to everyone. One day in 2019, Renji told her brother Roho that she wanted a copy of the autopsy report for their brother Roy, who was Julie's husband, and whom she had killed with cyanide in his food. When Renji read the report and the death certificate, she was shocked because the time of death was listed as 6:20 p.m. The doctors had said Roy consumed cyanide, and someone who takes cyanide dies immediately. During the autopsy, they found undigested food in his stomach, which meant the substance entered his body through the food. But how could the food still be undigested? At that moment, Renji remembered the conversation she had with Julie after her brother's death. When she asked, "What was the last thing Roy ate?" Julie told her, "Curry hummus with rice," which was his favorite dish. So she asked her, "When did he eat it?" Julie answered, "He ate it around 3 p.m. while he was out." In the evening, when he came back home, he didn't eat anything. She was shocked because there was a strange contradiction between what she said and the autopsy report. It became clear that in the evening, she must have prepared food for him and put cyanide in it. After eating, he died right after going to the bathroom. Renji was now sure that Julie was responsible for everything that happened to the family. The first thing she did was go to the officer in charge at the nearest police station and told him the whole story from beginning to end. She told him about all the people who had died in their family, about her brother's autopsy report, and about his wife's contradictory statements. She made it clear that she suspected Julie. The officer took her words seriously and referred the case to the crime department, where a team was formed to investigate the matter. The first step they took was going to the school, where Julie claimed to work as a teacher, to verify her information. When they asked the school officials about her, they were shocked when the officials said, "We don't have any teacher by that name, neither full-time nor part-time." They were amazed at how deceitful this woman was. Renji told them that Julie always wore an ID badge around her neck, stamped and signed, which made everyone nervous because they all thought she was a teacher and feared her. They asked, "What's her educational background?" Renji replied, "She has a master's in commerce." When they checked her records, they found several university degrees and other professional certificates. But the surprise came when they verified the authenticity of those certificates and discovered that none of them were in Julie's name. They were in the name of another woman, Elizabeth Sebastian, and they were all forged. Julie had never completed high school, and the certificates she had were all under Elizabeth's name. She had gotten them from a company, removed Elizabeth's name and details, and replaced them with her own information. After uncovering this information, the police began to suspect Julie of being behind the 6 murders, so they sent her a summons to investigate the matter as soon as possible. When Julie received the summons, she was shocked and immediately called her son Remo, saying, "Your uncle and aunt suspect me of killing 6 people in the family." She asked him to call them and stop the investigation. Remo was stunned and confused. He thought, "How could my mom be a murderer?" This kind of stuff only happens in movies and TV shows. But he didn't doubt his mother and called his Aunt Renji, asking her to drop the case if they didn't have any strong evidence. But Renji, in an emotional tone, said that the case would not be closed until the truth was revealed. At this point, the news started spreading more, especially after Roy and the uncle's deaths, and there were rumors circulating about the murders. 4 family members had died under similar circumstances, as well as Silly and her daughter Alphine. The media began covering the story, and they discussed the criminal investigation, which included exhuming the bodies to try to find traces of cyanide in the remains of the 6 victims. Despite the challenges, especially since the first victim had died in 2002 and the body had significantly decomposed, the police had no choice but to try. When Renji's relatives on her mother and father's side learned that the graves would be exhumed, they were upset and said, "Your family members have passed away, and now you won't even let them rest in peace after death." But they didn't care about those objections because they knew this was the only way to find out what really caused their deaths. Indeed, the graves were dug up, and all the remains were taken and sent to the lab for tests to try and detect any traces of cyanide. In the meantime, Remo sat down with his mother Julie and said, "All the media is talking about these murders. Be honest with me. Are you behind all of these deaths?" Julie initially tried to change the subject, but after his persistence, she finally admitted that she was responsible for all those murders. Remo was shocked and called his Aunt Renji, saying, "Auntie, this woman killed everyone in our family." Renji asked, "How do you know?" He replied, "She confessed everything to me, and you need to call the police right away to arrest her." At that moment, Renji remembered that Julie might have cyanide hidden in the house, so she told him, "Don't eat or drink anything, you and your brother, and don't go to sleep. Wait until the police arrive." And indeed, the next morning, the police raided the house and arrested Julie on charges of killing her husband and suspected of murdering the other 5 victims. After the arrest, Renji went into the house to take care of the boys and found the place in terrible condition, dirty and unkempt. She took her nephews to her home to care for and raise them. We owe a lot to Renji for what she did. If it weren't for her persistence and determination to uncover the truth, Julie would have never been exposed for who she truly was. But in the end, she was caught. Who knows how many more people she would have killed to get what she wanted? After Julie's arrest, the police admitted they hadn't given the case much attention at first, but they charged her with killing her mother-in-law for power, killing her uncle for his property, and killing her husband because he suspected her relationship with M. Smith, a gold trader. She was also accused of killing her uncle Man Shadil to avoid raising suspicion. So that she could marry Sheijo, she killed his wife, Silly, and their daughter, Alphine. But after all this, they asked her, "Were you the only one behind all these murders?" She told them, "One day, I read in the newspapers that cyanide is extremely toxic, and that people who work in jewelry can get it easily. That's how I met Im Smithyo, who also worked in jewelry, and that's why we became friends. I asked him to get me some cyanide, telling him there's a guy named Wefik who keeps coming to our house, and I want to get rid of him." Im Smithyo had no problem helping her, and it's said that what he got in return was something immoral. So there's no need to mention it. Anyway, after her confession, Im Smithyo was arrested because of his involvement. At first, they accused him of being part of the 6 murders, but he told them, I had nothing to do with those killings. When I gave her the cyanide, I didn't know she would use it for murder. If I had known, I never would have given it to her. After that, the police went to Julie's house and searched it thoroughly. They found traces of cyanide, but even with that, they said they didn't have enough evidence to convict her in the case. They needed to find cyanide traces in the bodies of all the victims in order to link the murders together. Otherwise, they wouldn't have a solid case proving she was the killer. Julie was charged with the murders, and her trial is ongoing for each crime. The 6 cases are expected to be closed within 6 years, and the events we're talking about now happened in 2020. As for her husband Roy's body, as we mentioned, cyanide was found on his body after it was exhumed in 2018. In 2020, cyanide was also discovered in Cilly's body. As for the other 4 victims, samples from their bodies were sent to the forensic lab for analysis. But in 2023, the results came back negative. On March 6, 2023, her trial began for the 6 murders in criminal court, and the trial is still ongoing today. Not only was Julie imprisoned, but also her friend Imsmithio, to determine whether he had any involvement in these crimes she was accused of. After all this came out, Renji and Rojo's relatives called them and apologized for how their family had tried to stop the exhumation of the bodies. After hearing the news, they were shocked to learn that this woman had killed 6 people for such petty reasons. After everything that happened, Renji wondered, what drove this woman to do all of this? Was it money, power, or property? So she decided to visit her in prison to hear the answer directly. When she saw her, she could tell from her facial expression that Julie had no remorse for anything she'd done. Renji asked her, "What was your goal in all this?" Julie replied with just one sentence, "What's done is done." That's how she justified everything she had done, with one simple sentence. After these events, the family returned to their home, closed the door behind them, and lived together. Renji, Rojo, and their nephews, finally in peace and love, trying to forget the painful past they had endured because of Julie's crimes. And that's the end of our story. I hope you all enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe so this content can grow. I'll see you in the next video. Take care.